Good evening. I'm Andy, and welcome to my channel. Tonight, bear with me a moment, I'm actually going to be reading my very first original story, which I called Rebirth. You could call this my VTuber lore, so to speak. I decided when I first started, way back in 2001, yeah, all that long ago, that I would be just go ahead and get in and not worry too much about trying to make all the stuff nice and pretty first. But as you can probably guess, things got a little bit busy for me. It's very easy to get distracted once you've started streaming and such, and I didn't really spend a lot of time trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my lore and such. So I decided that I wanted to take some time to do that, and it just so happened that another VTuber I know, who I met because of Cinna, named Kat, the Cheshire Book Mouse, was holding a story contest, and I was helping Cinna with her entry, and suddenly was inspired to actually try writing something for myself. And it ended up actually working out really well. It was a challenge to write because I wanted this to be real. I mean, in the sense of it actually being a thing that was real to me, not just here's my backstory, please enjoy, but something that helps y'all get to know me a little better. By the way, I should put Sam is in my lab, purring. There we go. I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous reading this. Hi Gabby, thanks. I'm a little bit nervous reading this. I really enjoyed writing the story, but this is my first time presenting my own work since, realistically, since I was in school. And, like, college school. Because, and even then it was just the occasional public speech, which is, honestly, if you've done public speeches, they're pretty terrifying sometimes. But I'd never actually tried to read off anything that was fictional that I'd made. And while and the truth is, I was kind of scared too for a long time. It's a big step to be not just to write, because I've never really talked about it, but I always at least tried to write stuff for a long time. Oh, hold on. Let me lower that just a little. Okay. So I've... lost what I was going to say. So I have at least tried to write a lot in the past, but it's honestly been really challenging actually completing anything. Part of my head kept wanting to make it better and fix it before it was even finished, so I ended up getting sidetracked with that. So writing the story meant a lot to me because it's like I said, it's helping you get to know me personally, and not just the VTuber, but me, and also because it's the first time I truly was able to just keep writing it until I was done, and then worrying about revisions. So I didn't get anxious or worried about it and constantly trying to improve it. So that said, I wanted to give everyone a chance to get settled in and nice and comfy before I started reading. And I will go ahead and get started. Nervous or not, I'm sure y'all are really eager to hear me, really eager to listen to my story. And I think this is kind of a stage fright type of thing, but I'm actually eager to share it too. Because I've done enough live performances, like theater, that I know what stage fright feels like. So, without further ado, here is my very first original story, which I called Rebirth. So, you could call this Chapter 1, Rewind. It was Christmas Eve, and it was unseasonably warm. It usually stays above freezing in the part of the U.S. where I live, but it had gotten up to almost 60 degrees today, which was enough to make me want to dig a pair of shorts out of my closet. Or at least, if I was feeling up to it, which I wasn't always. It had been a few months since Mom died. I was past the initial numbness and grief, which had gotten me past the immediate sorrow of the week or two preceding the memorial service, but it also left me feeling rather drained and unmotivated ever since. At least nobody had told me to get back on the horse, or they're in a better place now, which are among the worst things you can tell someone who's grieving a loved one. Any child is going to be close to one of their parents, but I was especially close to Mom. For several years, I had called her almost daily to keep in touch and to just talk with her about things, at least until she was hospitalized and too weak to hold up phone conversations. The only times I had gotten to see her after that were by phone video when Dad had visited her on weekends, since the hospital had allowed no other visitors due to pandemic restrictions. I don't really want to talk about the last day I saw her. It brings all the feelings back, including how utterly helpless and pathetic I felt. I was her eldest child. I had literally known her my entire life, and only Dad had known her longer. And I couldn't do anything. It's not a way for me to feel happy or at peace with myself. Not that I was feeling that way anyway, but no sense in prodding it like it was a sore tooth. I really didn't like feeling this way. So when a good friend of mine was talking exuberantly a few weeks ago about her favorite VTubers on the Discord server we were both in, something about what she had said broke through my melancholy. I hadn't often paid close attention to her on the subject, since I wasn't big on the whole streaming thing that had been growing over the past decade or so. But Mom had always really enjoyed performance art like theater, so I think maybe I just wanted something that might have made me think of happier times a little. I don't know what I had been expecting, but it had not been anime characters brought to life. I was really amazed when I first saw it, and even more amazed when I realized that this was something anyone could do if they just put their mind to it. When I asked my friend if she knew how I could go about doing this myself, she seemed a little shocked at my sudden interest, but quickly pointed me towards an artist she knew who had both drawn and rigged VTuber models. The level of detail was really impressive, so I reached out to her and arranged to have her make me a model. It really was pricey, but since I'd enjoyed the times I'd acted in my mom's plays, it was a way to keep my last unspoken promise, to keep her memory alive. Mom and I both really loved cats, so I decided to go with an orange and white Nekomimi model with a cat-themed treble clef on the shirt. I chose the musical motif because I had been an avid singer when I was young, and I wanted to start doing that again. As for the coloration, I didn't really know. It just felt right. I had only just gotten the sketch back in the past couple days, and it looked great. Incredibly so, in fact. It was almost like the artist had read my mind, despite me only giving a rough description. I couldn't help but think about how happy Mom would have been if she could have seen this. Of course, the thought of her missing out had made me feel pretty dejected for the past several days. I had finally brought myself out of it by reminding myself of my promise. Though I wasn't entirely recovered from this latest bout of wrestling with my melancholy. Honestly, I was pretty tired of feeling this way. Even the bright sunlight today seemed muted and dim, to say nothing of previous days and weeks where it hadn't been particularly bright or sunny. Part of me was just feeling especially drained after this latest episode of melancholy. Thankfully, I didn't have to work on Christmas, so I'd have a couple of days still to get myself back on an even keel. I sent a message to the artist to let her know that I really liked the proposed design, and that she could go ahead and set it up to be rigged. She lived on the other side of the world, so it wasn't until the late evening for me that I got her response, which was a simple "okay," and letting me know how much the model would be done in a couple months. I didn't have any idea of how long it should take, so it seemed okay to me, and I let her know. Then I went to bed. Thankfully, I had my small cousins, as I called my cats, who kept me company during the night. Loki usually slept next to my legs, and Sam slept as close to my head as he could manage. Next, revisit. I seldom remembered my dreams, but the ones I did remember were usually pretty wild. This one was no exception. I looked outside the living room window and saw a black and white cat the size of a lion, or at least a tiger, standing on the sidewalk outside. And the cat seemed oddly familiar to me too, though dreams being dreams, I didn't question that. Maybe because of that feeling of recognition, my dream self wasn't at all alarmed. So I ran outside to get a better look at this amazing sight, and to try to see if the cat would be willing to let me get close. As I went, I passed other cats who seemed familiar. A long-haired calico lounging on a chair, a rotund orange and cream cat sitting by where I put the food bowls down, a light gray Siamese sitting next to a dark gray tabby, and outside in the yard, several other cats who peered at me oddly from where they were sunning themselves. None of them were as large as the first one I'd seen, though. As I stepped outside, I was a little struck by the chill in the air. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was noticeable compared to inside the house, and the sky was completely overcast with clouds. Not particularly dark ones, but enough so I couldn't really see the sun. The two-toned, black and white cat, black on top and white on the underbelly and legs, sniffed me over first, of course. If you've ever had a good relationship with a cat, you know the drill. You don't try to push yourself on them, you make sure the cat is okay with you first. Even a regular-sized cat could leave you with a nasty scratch or three. And I didn't want to find out what a cat that was almost big enough to ride on could do if it got startled or upset. Fortunately, the cat didn't seem perturbed by me, and after checking my scent, rubbed its nose against my hand. It was a beautiful cat, even though it was bigger than any other cat and even dog I'd ever seen. Now that I was up close, I could tell it was actually big enough that I could sit on its back with room to spare. Not that I planned to, but it was a really cool idea. The cat, though, had other ideas. With an abrupt movement, it bumped into me, knocking me forward and over its back. I was surprised enough that I couldn't stop myself from falling, and ended up sprawled awkwardly over its back. As I started to push myself upwards, I felt the cat suddenly crouch, causing me to grab onto its fur to keep from falling off and hitting my head, and then it took off with me on its back. I'd obviously never ridden a cat before, but between one blink and the next, I found myself sitting astride it as it ran down the street towards a brick-and-mortar elementary school. Darting past, it dashed around the corner, heading into the street. If I had been awake, I would have been terrified. But there weren't any cars or anything in the dream, so there was nothing to stop me from laughing in delight as we sped down the shallow hill and back onto the other side of the street. The cat ducked onto one of the side streets a couple blocks south, where a large rectangular park awaited. The main feature of the park was the small hill in the middle, with a hollow surrounding it that extended almost to the streets bordering it on all sides. It reminded me of a lake, where all the water had been drained actually, as if the little mound-like hill had been an island once upon a time. Without a moment's hesitation, the cat leapt down into the hollow. My momentary sense of alarm quickly faded as the cat kept gracefully moving forward towards the island, before hopping back up and coming to a stop near the large tree sitting almost in the middle of the island. After it stopped, it went into the cat-love crouch, leaving me more or less standing astride it. I didn't know what to think, but since the cat was clearly done running around with me as its passenger, I stepped out from over the cat and moved to where I could get a better look at it. Now that I was close to it, the sense of familiarity increased, along with another feeling I couldn't quite place. A sad feeling, like melancholy or regret. I didn't much like the way it felt, so I quickly moved to just pet the large black and white cat who had absconded with me. Not that I minded the cat absconding with me, I was just surprised by how suddenly it had happened. Now that I was able to look more closely, I noticed that the cat's fur pattern oddly resembled how I envisioned a shark. I felt a small lump in my throat at that thought and wondered why. But before I could dwell on it, the cat opened its mouth wide and gave a big yawn, the way cats do when they're relaxed. So, I've never seen a giant cat before, I wondered aloud, and was rather thoroughly startled when I heard a voice suddenly speak up in response. Maybe you are just a tiny human. Next, reply. Wait, what? I looked around wildly, as I could have sworn I was alone other than the cat. But I didn't see anyone around. I even peered up into the tree, in case someone was perched up in the branches, but nothing. Then the voice spoke again. Down here, it said, coming from the cat? Maybe because it was a dream, I didn't have any trouble accepting what would be utterly preposterous outside of fiction. Wait, what? Are you talking to me? There was nothing strange to me about talking to a cat. I talked to my small cousins as if they were able to understand me all the time, after all. But usually they responded with cat noises like meowing and purring, not actual words. The cat simply gazed at me with a neutral expression on its face. Who else would I be talking to? Even shocked as I was, I noticed that the cat's mouth wasn't actually moving the way a human's would. An inane thought, perhaps, but a natural one. Right? My mind tried to go in several directions at once, as I mentally grappled with the idea of having a conversation with a cat. The cat slowly narrowed its eyes and then opened them back up. Cat got your tongue? I couldn't help but let out a short, involuntary laugh at the really awful pun. Sorry, I'm not really used to cats talking back to me. I mean, understanding them. Maybe you just needed to be in the right state of mind. The cat gazed at me steadily, in that really calm and relaxed way cats seem to do by instinct, though I had no idea what the cat meant by that. So I retreated into the usual pleasantries as my mind grappled with the oddity of the situation. Well, nice to meet you. The giant cat didn't respond for a moment, instead licking its paw and running it backwards over its head. Again. I was taken aback by the simple one-word statement, and the cat continued after a moment. We have met before. We have? The cat did seem familiar to me, but that was all. A rather faded sense of recognition, with that same tinge of sadness that I couldn't quite make out. That we have met again means you may remember in time, the cat replied, and then started purring. The sound was quite soothing at least, and I felt myself relaxing a little. I still had no idea what was going on, or what the cat was talking about, but the low vibrations of a cat's purr had always been quite soothing to me ever since I was little. Hello, Mighty Morphin Joe Young. Nice to see you. So I've already finished the first 2 chapters, but they're primarily an introduction. To give you a quick summary, it was just basic details about the Christmas Eve, when I had received my the VTuber concept sketches, and then the first parts of a dream where a giant black and white cat was waiting outside my old house. Oh, Joy, okay. I'm sorry, I forgot. You're right, though. The second chapter, so the first chapter was actually called Rewind. The second chapter is called Revisit, because it had me waking up in the middle of a dream with the, in my childhood home, it's not in the story yet, but I don't mind sharing that, and a giant black and white cat outside that as soon as I came close enough, absconded me with me on its back and took me to this park. And now we're having a conversation wherein I am trying to grapple with the idea of a giant cat that can have a conversation with me. So, continuing. Hope you enjoyed the story, by the way. I had a great time writing it. After a moment, I shook my head to clear it a little. So, why did you bring me here? It had been something of a wild ride, and while I had kind of enjoyed it, I was a little surprised it had ended up this close to my childhood home? Huh, it was my childhood home, and I recognized this park, where I often played where the weather was good. Because you needed distance. Hi, Lithia. The cat seemed fond of responding mysteriously. But maybe that was just how the cat thought? I had no idea how a cat who could talk would think. I'm actually reading my first original story. You might have seen that in the stream information. But the story is called Rebirth. I had a lot of fun writing it. So I'm looking forward to sharing it with y'all. The obvious question would have been, distance from what? But something in me didn't really want to ask that question. I wasn't entirely sure why, except that tinge of sadness had felt a little stronger when the question went through my mind. My gaze shifted downwards towards the grass I was sitting on, as thoughts slipped through my head too quickly for me to process, then I felt a cool nose bump my cheek, followed by smooth fur, and I looked up, startled, as the cat finished rubbing its face against mine. I'd read that cats did this to mark their scent on things, but I'd never believed that was the only reason. I'd seen cats do this plenty of times to each other as a sign of affection. They generally didn't do it to humans because of the size difference. But this cat was bigger than I was, and I was sitting down besides. I blinked a couple of times, rapidly, as the cat settled back on its haunches, looking me in the eyes. Are you feeling better? Maybe a little, I replied. Why did you do that? Do I need a reason to show affection? Sorry, I mean, how did you know to do that just then? Y'all, yep, I like that too, Joy. Cats are quite a bit more observant than humans, the cat answered, with that neutral cat expression anyone who is more than passingly familiar with cats knows intimately. It felt like the cat was just being mysterious for the sake of being mysterious, but then the cat continued. Part of being observant is knowing when to say or not to say something. Something about the way the cat had said that made me thoughtful. Because sometimes a person doesn't need to have everything spelled out, and sometimes they do. I had been prone to doing the latter by habit when I was younger, even though I wasn't very good at it. The cat's only response was to purr, and I couldn't help but chuckle just a little at the appropriateness of the response. So I guess you're here to help me figure things out or something? Like with the whole performing thing then? Would be really cool if I could include a giant talking cat somehow. The cat purred some more, then just when I was about to continue my train of thought, said, "Before you think of others, look to yourself first." Just as the cat finished saying that, the purring sound intensified, and I snapped awake as the engine noise of a passing car started to fade. So that is the third part. Part 4 is called Reunion. I groaned, my mind still caught between dream and reality, as the car noise continued past and quickly faded. I always had a hard time getting back to sleep after getting woken up like that. What was with that dream? It was amazingly vivid, even though some of the details had already faded. My childhood home and all of those cats in it. Then going for a ride on that giant black and white cat, and ending up at a park I had sometimes played at. My sleepy thoughts drifted back to that cat. I remembered it seeming familiar to me in the dream, but now that I was awake, it was hard to remember the details. I felt myself blinking as I thought of the cat, and I felt a slight stinging at the corner of my eyes. I rubbed my eyes slightly and felt dampness. I had shed plenty of tears for Mom, wishing she was still here and able to see me as I worked to become a VTuber. But I also knew that she would be proud of me for what I was doing. These tears seemed different, though. They felt much more faded than the tears that came from remembering Mom, but at the same time carried a sharpness that made me instinctively want to shy away from it. Maybe if I were more awake, I would have thought more about this, but it was the middle of the night, and noisy cars aside, my body just wanted more sleep. So after tossing and turning a bit to get comfortable, I eventually drifted off again. Maybe it was right after falling asleep. Maybe it was later on during the night. But I found myself dreaming again. As before, I was in my childhood home with a number of cats. Some I recognized as ones I'd adopted after moving out on my own. Some I remembered from before then. And some I didn't recognize very well at all. I glanced outside, wondering if that giant black and white cat would be here again. But I saw nothing through the window this time. "I don't suppose one of you can talk like that other cat?" I asked jokingly, but the only response I got was for the calico to hop off the couch where she was lounging and start to pad out of the room. Then she stopped, looked back at me, and mewed before continuing on her way. I recognized her, of course. Kitten, my much-loved old lady cat, and the first to properly live with me rather than with my parents and me. She had gotten really sick last year, though she had lived a pretty full life before I had to say goodbye. I was really happy to see her again, But she had always been somewhat flippant as far as the other cats went, and I decided to follow her to see where she was going. I stepped into the short hallway between the kitchen and dining room, just in time to see her turn the corner and go up the stairs from the dining room. I quickly followed her up the stairs, though she got around the corner before I reached the top. When I got there, I saw no sign of Kitten, but I did see my old room right at the top of the stairs. Well, shared room anyway, since there hadn't been enough individual bedrooms for my brothers and I. I didn't see Kitten inside, but she could have been under the bed. So I stepped inside to look around. It was more or less as I remembered it. A closet by the door, a bunk bed past where the stairwell got low enough for the room to extend, a pair of small dressers, and some shelves above them. I smiled as I saw the little blue frisbee I'd used to occasionally sneak dry cat food up here for. I just stared at it blankly for a moment, carefully not thinking, as I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature run down my spine. Then I took a shuddering breath and carefully turned around, and found myself at the bottom of the steps. I just stood there for a long moment, letting my breath out. I didn't. As my mind spun, I felt soft fur brush against my leg, and looked down. There was a familiar orange and white cat there, the second of the cats I'd taken in after moving out of my parents' home. Envy, who had slowly fallen ill most of a decade ago. By the time I noticed something was wrong, she was too far gone. I'd barely had time to say goodbye. I gently picked her up, cradling her in my arms, feeling tears trickle down my cheeks. Envy, I said, my voice shaking as all the words that shook at shock and sorrow had kept me from being able to say built up behind the lump that was suddenly in my throat. Oh, Envy. She quietly nuzzled my cheek, purring like she had never been gone, as I started weeping softly. And then not so softly. It hadn't hurt like this when I'd had to say goodbye to Kitten. I'd never realized I still held this much grief for her. My beautiful, gentle Envy, who I'd found as a tiny kitten in the bushes, who I'd carefully cradled as I rode home on my bike, who had been perfectly content to live with me, and with my roommate when she came to live with me later on. I shook harder as memories played back through my head, all the happy memories of the time she had spent with me and Kitten and Sam and my roommate, that had been eclipsed by the one sad memory of that final day, when all I could do was hold her gently as she slipped away, feeling like all that happiness had burnt away, leaving only ashes. Just a moment. I don't know how long I stood there, crying in Envy's fur and clinging to her, as she continued to purr in her gentle, steady way. Finally, I felt my shuddering slow and cease as I choked out the last few sobs, opening my puffy eyes and looking at Envy as I gently stroked her fur. After I'd had to let her go, I'd imagined there was still a connection between us, beyond a mere emotional attachment. One I believed in completely, despite the lack of reasons to. I didn't feel emotionally drained the way I had felt when I was crying for Mom. It felt like something long stuck inside me had popped loose, freeing the torrent of emotion that had been pent up behind it. Sorry, I had to blow my nose. But after the initial burst of grief and sadness had flooded through me, other happier emotions had flowed in their wake, calming and soothing me. I couldn't say that the process had felt especially pleasant, but no longer having to carry this burden I had gotten so used to that I had stopped noticing it. It was cliché, but it made me feel lighter and freer. I cuddled Envy for a few more minutes before settling her in the crook of my arm. She mewed softly at me, then snuggled in. I could tell she was happy to see me. She always had been, after all. Then I walked back into the living room, seeing all the cats laying about. It wasn't difficult to put names to most of them. Midnight, black with speckles of white like the moonless night sky, who I had helped rescue from a miserable, clawless abandonment. Graceless, a light and dark gray tortoiseshell who had always been super noisy and a little uncoordinated. Kaya, a chocolate point Siamese who had always had something to say. Bobcat, a skittish gray tabby who had always been eager for head pats. Artemis, a lighter gray tabby who I had jokingly called the third, due to her being the third cat I had bonded with, and who keened when I whistled. Shadow, a white and black shorthair who had quietly let me carry her everywhere. And many of my parents' cats who I recognized but couldn't easily put names to. But one was missing. The next section is called Rekindle. I could tell now that this wasn't a mere dream. I knew how long cats typically lived for, so even if I hadn't recognized Kitten and Envy first, I would have realized by now. But I had loved them, and I knew that they had returned the favor. Despite what many people believed, cats were fully capable of returning friendship, love, and caring to those who showed it to them. I spent a few minutes walking about, quietly giving little head pats with my free hand, and getting nose rubs and nuzzling in turn. It took quite a while, as there were well over a dozen cats in this room, but they had all the time in the world, and I could afford to spend some of mine on my beloved small cousins from the past. After a while, I saw Kitten at the doorway, flicking her tail slightly as she watched me quietly, and I smiled and stood up, Envy still cradled in my arm, softly purring as she napped contentedly. But as I stood up, Kitten suddenly stood up and started walking towards the kitchen. I frowned a bit and softly called out, "Kitten?" But she just continued walking, so I followed her, careful not to wake Envy. I entered the connecting hallway just in time to see Kitten head through the doorway to the basement stairs. It was actually a wide open area with support pillars, though my parents had set up fabric to serve as walls. Once my siblings and I were old enough to need individual rooms, my parents had set up extra bedrooms down here. It had been chilly at times, especially in the winter, but overall there had been more space than in the upstairs bedrooms. That was also where I had found Sharky. I let out a ragged breath as Envy stirred slightly in my arms. My first ever cat. From when I was just barely 5. Thanks, Gabby. black and white kitten, even younger than Envy. Who my parents didn't feed until he was old enough to eat proper food. I named him Sharky because his fur pattern reminded me of a shark. Dark fur on top and white fur on his underside and legs. And because he made me think of a shark with his agile pouncing. I had loved and cared for him. I brought him to the top bunk bed to sleep alongside me. I'd snuck food upstairs to feed him too on occasion. Envy stirred in my arms again as the many memories tumbled through my head in a moment. Then I remembered. 3 years after Sharky came to live with us, I had gone looking for him because he hadn't shown up for a couple of days. I had looked everywhere in the house for him. I had looked everywhere in the house for him, and the basement was the only place that I hadn't checked. It hadn't taken long to find him, but it was dim down there. And it looked like he was sleeping until I reached out to nudge him awake. And found him stiff and cold. I started to tremble again as Envy quietly muted me. Something about that sound woke from the hold that the memory had on me. And I started petting her again. Feeling my trembling fade away. It had been awful to remember that. Even worse than remembering Envy, who I had at least been able to say goodbye to. Sharky had been gone before I had ever realized it. I didn't know why Kitten had gone down there. The memory had been so horrifying for my young mind that I had simply refused to remember it. It was more than awful enough to make me start to turn aside from the doorway to the basement entirely. I didn't need to go down there. I didn't want to remember any more of this. Then Envy stood up in my crooked arm, I should say, and stretched a little, pushing herself up so she could reach my face, and started nuzzling me again. And I felt the cold, gnawing fear that had been winding through my insides begin unraveling. Just like that. And with the panic born from that fear fading away, I remembered what else I had forgotten about that day. Just a moment, I need some water. My family had been getting ready to go to church, but I was worried about Sharky. I hadn't seen him for a while, and he'd never just vanished like that. I'd looked everywhere else, and Mommy suggested I check the basement. I headed down there, turning on the light, since the windows high in the basement walls didn't give much light to see by. After a few minutes, I spotted him curled up on the ground. I was so relieved that I walked right over, saying, "Sharky, there you are, you naughty cat." And I reached out to him to shake him, thinking nothing of it. But he was stiff and cold, and it was like all the lights in the universe went out for a moment. "Sharky!" Next thing I knew, I was upstairs, Sharky cradled between my arms, sobbing uncontrollably as I held him out to Mommy, begging her to help somehow. But there was nothing she could do. Nothing anyone could do. Nothing but do their best to console me, while Daddy quietly dug Sharky's grave in the backyard. I had stopped weeping by then, watching numbly as Mommy and Daddy gently laid him in his grave and said a prayer before covering Sharky in soil. I placed a marker so I'd never forget where Sharky was. Even with envy comforting me, I still felt tears flow down my cheeks at those sorrowful memories. That had been too much pain. And too much loss. For a child not yet 10 to face. No surprise, I had stopped myself from remembering that day, even from remembering my best friend Sharky at all. It was incredibly hard for me to take the first step downstairs. I don't think I could have done it if I weren't holding on to Envy, who had settled back down into her comfortable spot in the crook of my left arm. It was much easier to take the last one either, even with her in my arms. I kept dreading what I'd feel as I got closer. Then I walked into the small alcove where I found Sharky laying. And nothing. It was just an alcove near the hot water heater. I heard Kitten mew from behind me, as if getting my attention. I turned and saw her, standing behind me, her tail slowly flicking back and forth. I stood there for a moment, just standing, before I took a step toward her, away from a place away from what had been a place of horror in my childhood memories, but was truly just a quiet, empty spot in an old basement. Sharky might have died there, but it wasn't where he was now. Begin the next part in a moment. Thank you for bearing with me. I truthfully cannot remember Envy or Sharky, or really, I mean, those are, I cared for all of my small cousins when I was growing up and when I was an adult, but those were the two that probably hurt the most to lose, to have to say goodbye to, I should say. And part of this was to address those lingering feelings, not to try to deny them. Because one thing I realized is that denying feelings doesn't make them go away. It just means that they become harder to cope with when you do finally have to address them. So that was part of the intent of writing this, to address the unreconciled feelings that I had in general, not just with Kitten. Kitten too. But I did have the chance to say properly goodbye to her. But Envy and Sharky, who I barely had a chance to. So the next part is I titled Reconciliation. Kitten stood still long enough for me to reach her, and to bend down and give her some petting. She always had been somewhat standoffish, especially if other cats were involved, but I think she knew I needed to do that. Then she walked away, back up the steps. I followed after a moment, quietly closing the basement door behind me after I got into the kitchen. I somehow knew that none of the other cats had gone down there, and while that was no longer a place for me to avoid, it also held little in the way of things I wanted to remember. Right now, I wanted to find Sharky, to see him, to talk to him, even if he couldn't talk back. Talk back. I hurried to the kitchen door, looking outside for that giant black and white cat from earlier, which had reminded me of a shark. I hadn't realized the connection until just now, but that had to have been Sharky somehow. I looked out the front door on my way past it, but there was still no cat waiting there, like there had been in the last dream. That left the backyard. There were actually two parts to it. The fenced-in part with the little shed, clothesline, and the brick patio between the door and the fence gate, and a somewhat overgrown, unfenced section where Sharky had actually been buried. I got to the back door and then stopped, remembering I was still cradling Envy. She didn't seem worried, instead gazing contentedly outside. Oh, a moment. To start the music again. Are you okay with coming outside with me, Envy? I don't want to let you go again, but I will if you want to stay here with my other small cousins. She looked up at me and mewed softly, then started washing her paw. I'll take that as a yes, I said with a small smile. If Envy had wanted to get down, I would have let her, but it made me very happy that she wanted to stay with me. If Sharky was going to be out here, I knew exactly where he would be, so I stepped outside onto the brick patio. It felt cool out here, and I could see little flakes of snow starting to drift down out of the evening sky, even though most of the clouds from before were gone. I couldn't see where Sharky had been buried from where I stood, since the shed and the bushes on the other side of the fence were in the way. So I walked around to the gate and down the sidewalk, towards the little overgrown section. At first, I didn't see Sharky there, but as I turned the corner, I finally noticed him. His black fur made it surprisingly hard to see him against the bushes. I just stood there and gazed at him for a long, long moment, feeling a sense of nostalgic melancholy now that I truly remembered him. A melancholy for all the years that I hadn't been able to spend with him. But finally, I stepped off the sidewalk and onto the grass, snowflakes drifting down around me. I had no idea when or even if I would be able to see Sharky again, and so I walked there, envy cradled in my left arm. He was gazing at me, solemnly, as I approached, and I slowed to a stop. I didn't know what I should say to him, but finally, I said, "Hi, Kai. Thank you for the raid. How was your stream? I heard that you did your 2D reveal today. Give you a quick shout out." We're playing Hunter Stories too, huh? Let's see, also. So if you want to follow Kai, I highly recommend him because he's a very enthusiastic and entertaining T-Rex VTuber. I'm glad to hear that, Kai. So I'm actually reading my very first original story, although I'm most of the way done with it. But you got to the really important part, so I'm hoping that you understand if you need to head out, because I know streams can be very tiring, but I'm hoping if you would be interested that you would like to stick around to hear the last little bits. That's because this story was very powerful and meaningful to me, and I'm really just very happy to get to share it with people. So I will start at the beginning of the paragraph I just read. At first, I didn't see Sharky there, but as I turned the corner, I finally noticed him. His black fur made it surprisingly hard to see him against the bushes. I just stood there and gazed at him for a long, long moment, feeling a sense of nostalgic melancholy now that I truly remembered him. A melancholy for all the years that I hadn't been able to spend with him. But finally, I stepped off the sidewalk and onto the grass, snowflakes drifting down around me. Thank you, Joy, I appreciate that. I had no idea when or even if I would be able to see Sharky again, and so I walked there, envy cradled in my left arm. He was gazing at me, solemnly, as I approached, and I slowed to a stop. I didn't know what I should say to him, but finally I said, "I'm sorry I forgot about you, Sharky." I felt moisture on my cheeks again. Maybe some would have pretended that it was melting snowflakes, but I was too honest with myself for that. It wasn't just sadness in these tears, it was guilt. I hadn't even noticed that anything was wrong until after it was too late. And so I was never able to truly say goodbye to my first little friend. You didn't forget. Your heart always remembered me. Otherwise, I could not be here now. But I didn't even realize that anything was wrong. I felt my head droop at this admission, the reason why I had blocked it all out. It had just been too awful to face, and I had hidden it away even from myself. You were young. So was I. Young things make mistakes. I didn't know what was wrong, so I hid to try to keep it away. But it was already inside me. If I had not hidden, maybe we would have had more time. But you did look for me, and when you found me, you grieved for a person, not a pet. I looked back up at Sharky, not having thought of it like that. I still feel guilty, though. Sharky looked at me, his eyes glowing in the twilight. The world causes enough hurt without you continuing to hurt yourself for something you did not do. Let it go. I couldn't help but smile a little at that. You're not the first person to tell me that. You should listen then. Although Sharky had the usual neutral cat expression on his face, I felt like he was screaming at me. Just a little. I gave him a little grin in return. I'm really glad I got to see you again, Sharky. I didn't realize how much I'd missed you. A mew from Envy interrupted me, and I glanced down at her with a smile. And Envy, and Kitten, and Artemis, and all the other small cousins, too. But you were the very first, and so I missed you the longest of them all. I don't think seeing all of you here will make me stop missing you. I wouldn't want it to. But I also want to miss you in a way that helps me feel better, I guess? Or doesn't leave me feeling awful anyway. Think of us in ways which make you more than you are today, then. To that end, Sharky shifted his head a bit. Cousin, are you ready? And Envy mewed, as if she had been waiting for that. Ready? Ready for what? I couldn't help but be confused. Sharky shifted his head back to regard me. You have been thinking of an orange and white, cat-eared person who helps people feel better about things. Envy wants to help you with that, if you are willing to accept her. I don't understand. Accept her? I was already holding her. What did Sharky mean? You hold us all in your heart, but Envy is your dearest. You can carry her with you more directly. After all, you wished for her to be reborn, and she can be in you. Silence fell along with the snowflakes, over an odd sense of happiness. I struggled to understand what Sharky had just finished saying. Finally, I let out a breath and felt myself relax a little as I stopped trying to force understanding and focused on the feelings instead. I don't really understand what you're trying to tell me, Sharky. I've never been very good at understanding things without talking them out. But I feel like it's less important that I understand this than that I feel good about it. And I do. So, what do I need to do to make this happen? Sharky continued looking at me as Envy shifted her weight in the crook of my arm, and I felt their approval of my decision. You will know what you need to do after you awaken. Go well. And with that, twilight turned to night. Stars glittered in the sky like snowflakes drifting down around me. I looked up into the sky, admiring the way the snow and stars complemented each other. It's the end of the section. Give me one moment. I need some water. So the last section is called Reawakening. I'd never been very quick to wake up unless I had to, and today was no exception, especially on Christmas morning, under a warm comforter, with Sam and Loki curled up next to me as usual. So I just enjoyed feeling relaxed after the wonderful experience of getting to see all my past small cousins again, even if it had been just a dream. However, it had been much more vivid and memorable than my usual dreams, and I mused upon it. I had gotten to see Kitten again, and Envy, and Kaya, and Bobcat, and Artemis, and Shadow, and even Sharky. It had been such a wonderful dream. Before long, bodily needs reminded me that I couldn't just stay in bed all day, and I sleepily climbed out of bed to attend to business. I felt so relaxed that I was almost boneless, and I was still drowsy enough to not really be thinking much yet. As I finished washing my hands, I glanced up at the mirror, where I could see my silhouette. Something seemed off about it, but while I'd always had a pretty good ability to see in low light, there just wasn't enough to pick out any details. So I flipped the light on, shielding my eyes so they could properly adjust and blinking a bit at how bright the light seemed to be. When I finally looked in the mirror, the first thing I noticed was that my hair color seemed quite a bit lighter than I remembered. The next were the triangular ears that poked up out of my hair. I blinked, extremely surprised at that. For all the world seemed like cat ears attached to my head. Was I still in the middle of that dream? I gently felt one of the ears with my hand and noticed the fuzzy texture, and also the pressure of my hand against it. I ran my thumb up and down the ear and felt the grain of the fur, short hair. Whatever it was, I felt it resist slightly as I went against the grain and smooth out again when I pulled my thumb backwards. Beginning to really wake up now, I started looking the rest of me over. My eyes had shifted from their usual gray to a vivid amber. I hadn't noticed at first, but my reflection didn't stand quite as tall, and I also felt more slender, though that could just have been my reduced height. Oddly, I didn't really have a good mental picture of how tall I had been, just that I had been taller. It could have been an inch, or it could have been 6 inches. The other big difference suddenly made itself known, as I felt muscles in my, backside start tensing and relaxing with an odd sense of pressure from the motion. I looked behind me, though I couldn't see too well because much of my body was in the way, but I saw an orange and white striped something flick into my field of view and then back out again. After a couple more times, I managed to carefully grab a hold of it, and, I wasn't anywhere near as surprised as I'd been at the start, so it was easy to tell that I had a tail. One I knew better than to tug sharply or squeeze or anything else. There were other differences too. Nothing that would have really stood out a lot if I hadn't already been keyed up over suddenly finding myself with both cat ears and a tail. I mean, I would have noticed the other differences at some point, but it likely would not have been while I was still half asleep and dwelling on that dream. It hit me like a bolt of lightning then. Dream or not, that had been real. My small cousins had really been there, somehow. Sharky had said something about letting envy be reborn in me, and here I was with cat ears, with orange amber hair highlighted white, and even with a tail. I guess that explained that, and a few other things I had finally picked up on once I'd gotten my mind past becoming part cat, nekomimi as it's said in Japan. Though things I wasn't really going to investigate right now, and probably not for a while. I had enough on my plate getting used to the nekomimi part. But that explained the other part of what Sharky had told me. You will know what you need to do when you awaken, he had said, and I did know. Because while the VTuber avatar I had commissioned didn't match my new appearance exactly, most of the differences were due to the avatar being drawn akin to an anime character, while my appearance was clearly not drawn. And the word cute floated through my head, making me blush a little. I wasn't at all used to thinking of myself as cute, but there was no denying it either. She, my reflection, was cute, and since she was me, I was cute. I was going to be a VTuber. That promise to Mom I would have kept no matter what. But instead of just the faded memories of theater and singing that had been all I had to work with it originally, I had a proper foundation to work from. Not just Envy's gift of letting me be reborn as a Neko Mimi, something I hadn't realized I truly wanted until it was suddenly handed to me, but Sharky's gift of helping me rediscover the parts of myself that had been hidden away beneath what seemed like unending grief and sorrow and pain. No matter what the future had in store for me, this was the moment that my life truly began anew. And that's the end of the story. It was a sad story, but it was also more than just the sadness. It was putting the sadness to, I don't want to say to use, but putting the sadness in perspective, I should say. So, recognizing, I guess, that the sadness of losing my other small cousins was not the end of the world, and not just the end, but also the proof of how much I'd cared for them. And yes, I'm very grateful that Sam was in my lap pretty much that whole time. He got up a couple of times, just for a minute or so, and then came right back. I think he knew that I needed him. And yes, I'm definitely happy I was able to share that with y'all. It was a good experience to write the story. It was difficult for me at first. Yeah, I made it through. It was difficult for me at first when I wrote it because, I mean, those are feelings that I hadn't addressed for quite some time. And truthfully, who would want to remember as a child discovering that their beloved friend, as I thought of Sharky at the time, had died, not just being told it, but actually finding that awful fact out in the most abrupt way possible. There are sometimes when I wonder, why I was able to smile sometimes, because, I mean, sometimes the losing Sharky was honestly, until I lost my mom, the most painful event of my life. I mean, not gonna make excuses for it. What the perspective of additional years spent living has given to me was not available to my 8-year-old self. But in a way, this was me reaching out to my 8-year-old self and saying, it's okay. You were hurt, and there's nothing wrong with you needing to cry, to be sad about what happened. Not keeping those feelings pent up, and thus allowing myself to remember the good times that happened too. Even if many of those memories are faded now, because I am quite a bit older than 8 years old. But that said, I enjoyed getting to share that with you, even though it was definitely definitely saddening at times. But at the same time, it was more than just being sad. It was expressing it in a way that is healthy. I didn't, when I was younger, I didn't know, it was very difficult for me to cry about things. And I think you can guess why. Now I understand that it's perfectly okay to, if you, especially if you miss someone or if you lost someone, to cry for them. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this story, not just for me, but for anyone out there who is or has suffered, who is grieving or has grieved, I should say. And because one of the best ways you can ensure that you have fond memories to go along with is to remember the parts that were good as well. Not just the parts. If all you remember is the hurt and the pain and the grief, then it's blocking you from everything else. So that said, I'm very happy. Thank you for coming and listening to me read my first original story. I wrote this. I wrote it because of that story contest, but once I'd gotten into it, I realized that no matter what happened, it was a story that I needed to write, and I am very glad that I did. Well, yes, technically I am published now. Not on Amazon or anything like that. For one thing, it probably would need to be cleaned up some more and maybe get a cover illustration. But I can live with being published, and I somehow think this will be the first of many. Now that I have gotten myself to where I know that I can write, not just the belief that I could be a writer, but the knowledge that I have written something. I'll say that I think Sino couldn't be here, unfortunately, but she has been encouraging me to write for some time, actually. One thing that I haven't really talked about is that a while ago we tried to collaborate on a couple of stories, which I wasn't really ready to do the writing, and with my tendency to go in and try to correct stuff before the story was finished, I wasn't going to be terribly successful in succeeding to write. But now that I have, I think it's worth going back and revisiting those stories, maybe seeing what parts of them actually need to be told. But that is for another day. I had a great time reading this with y'all. Thank you very much for spending time with me. This was a great experience. Hi Zilla, thanks. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed hearing me read it as much as I enjoyed reading it. And that is even with the sad parts and the crying. Because I'm not going to deny, reading those parts again, really, those were sad tears, but at the same time, they were also, in a way, they were letting the sadness out, some more of that sadness out. Because one thing I know is that this is not just a short-term thing. Grief doesn't just go away, but you can let it out, and it helps to drive you too. Thanks, Joy. I really appreciate that. By the way, this is I didn't want to say this until afterwards, but I actually won that story contest with this story. So that really helped a lot too. Just the knowledge that people were touched and moved by my story. Even Kat, who was the one who was reading it aloud for Everyan, said that she really, really liked it. And it meant a lot to me, because in the recesses of my own mind, I'm always afraid that I can't produce something that is as good as I want it to be. That's one of the reasons I always tended to be a little bit perfectionist. Well, a lot perfectionist when I was younger. Because I was afraid that it wouldn't be accepted, it wouldn't be liked, and so I had to make it as good as possible. And unfortunately, I ended up, more often than not finishing it before and I'm glad I've finally broken that. That was also why I picked up art last year, because that had also was something I had been trying to do. And I think I haven't done a whole lot of art recently, but I have been working on it, and I feel like I'm finally coming out from the shadows and releasing myself from the artificial confines that I was holding myself to as a creator. I'd like to say it took me long enough, but as the saying goes, sometimes it takes whatever time it takes, and there is no shame if it takes somebody a bit longer, because you need whatever time you need to be able to do this stuff. And the best thing you can do is just be grateful that you were able to do it, not regretting that you couldn't do it quickly or more quickly. So yes, in a way, writing this story helps. It's given me my beginning, which I didn't have for the longest time. I mean, I obviously had this. There are a few things that I modified slightly here and there, but this is all absolutely, everything in the story is as it was, or as close to it as I can remember. So, in a way, me finishing this story really is the moment that things really truly began for me. Not moving on, but not leaving stuff behind, but being able to move forward without having to drag everything around with me the way I had done for so long. That said, so I'm really grateful I was able to do this. But, that is an alarm saying it's time to study Japanese. That said, I had to wake up early and spend 12 hours doing paperwork, which is not bad, but it does mean I'm a little bit tired. So I think now that I'm done with the story and had a chance to decompress a little, we're going to go ahead and find somebody to raid off to. But I'll thank you. I definitely wanted to make sure to thank y'all. It meant so much to me. So thanks Gabby, thanks Joy, thanks Lithia, thank you Kai, and I didn't see this initially. I was a little bit caught up in the emotions of the story, but thank you also to Hey Sands and anybody else and everyone else who followed Kai here. And also thank you Zilla. It means a lot to me that you were all here and sharing this moment with me. So, I think I want to actually raid off because this was a truly creative endeavor. Not just, I mean, story reading is always great, but this was me sharing something I created myself. with some help from Senna. She's very good at helping pick the best words, but all the words are mine. She just gave me some suggestions and improvements. So, we're going to go ahead and write off to, I think it's Lots of Love, who looks like they're doing some crafting. I'm not certain exactly, based on the little screenshot because I'm looking at it on my phone. But thanks again, everyone. I so much appreciate you taking time out of your busy day and coming to share with us the experience of reading my first original story with me. It meant so much. There really are. I could probably spend the next 10 minutes trying to come up with the words to say and keep sputtering along. So I'll just say, "Arigato gozaimashita," which is thank you very much in Japanese, with a little Neko twist to it. And Sam thanks you too. And although they don't usually come to my streams, but Loki and Greybell were lurking, at least a little bit. Greybell is sleeping behind me, and Loki, I think, is probably in the other room, but they're always around, and that's why I can do this. Yes, I can make it so that all of them are with me on my stream at any time. And they're really cute when they're like this, too. So, that said, Otsukiri everyone, you have a good evening.